The heat over Highway 191 looked almost alive that afternoon, rising off the asphalt in soft waves. Out there, where the desert opens up just beyond Silver Creek, Arizona, the world gets very quiet. A place where people pass through, fill their tank, buy a coffee, and disappear again. That was all Cole Maddox meant to do. He rolled his bike into the gravel in front of a sun-faded gas station and mini-mart. Dust on the chrome, bugs on the windshield. A helmet that had seen too many miles and too many nights he didn't talk about. He killed the engine, and for a moment there was nothing but the ticking of hot metal and the low hum of the ice machine by the door. He wasn't looking for a story. He wasn't looking for anyone. He just wanted caffeine, maybe something he could call dinner, and a quiet room somewhere down the road. The chime over the door gave a tired little jingle as he stepped inside. The air smelled like burnt coffee, floor cleaner, and the fryer that only came to life on weekends. A woman in a company polo shirt stood behind the counter, eyes on her phone. The cool air hit his face, and he felt his shoulders drop half an inch. And then he heard it. A small voice at the register. Careful, practiced, trying hard not to sound afraid. "Excuse me, ma'am. Do you have any old food for my bobcat? Like this stuff you'd throw away?" Cole stopped so suddenly his boot squeaked on the tile. At the counter stood a girl, maybe 10, maybe younger. It was hard to tell. Shoulders a little too squared for her size, like she'd been bracing herself against things for a while. In one hand, she held a few crumpled dollars. In the other, a plastic pet carrier with air holes punched along the sides. From inside that carrier, a pair of golden eyes watched everything. A bobcat. A real one. Young, but not a kitten. Tawny fur with faint spots, tufted ears twitching at every sound. Not a house cat, not remotely tame, but sitting quietly, pressed toward the side closest to the girl's leg. The cashier blinked. "Old food?" "Yes, man." The girl swallowed. "For my bobcat. I don't need anything. Just whatever's going bad. I know sometimes you have to throw stuff away in the back." It came out in a rush, like she'd rehearsed the words and they still tasted like shame. The cashier's face softened, then tightened again. You could see the policy manual flash behind her eyes. Health codes, corporate rules, cameras in the ceiling. "I'm sorry, honey," she said. "If it's expired, we're not allowed to give it out. Liability. I could get fired." The girl nodded like she'd expected that answer. Her fingers tightened on the handle of the carrier, knuckles white. Inside, the bobcat shifted, tail tip flicking once. The animal's ribs showed more than they should have through its thick fur. Cole watched from the aisle with the bottled coffee. He told himself it wasn't his business. People had hard days. Kids said strange things. Somewhere out here, there had to be a wildlife rehab center, a ranger, a mother, a plan. But then he heard it. That sound a hungry stomach makes when a person has gone one day too long without enough. Not from the bobcat, from the girl. She winced like her own body had betrayed her secret. In that moment, the scene changed. It wasn't about old food for a bobcat anymore. It was about a child who knew how to ask for help for everything in her life, except herself. He'd heard a sound like that once before, in a different kitchen, in a different state. Years ago. He'd watched a little hand push the last piece of chicken off a plate to a golden retriever and say, "He needs it more than me, Daddy." Something in his chest pulled tight. The cashier shifted, clearly wanting to help, clearly afraid. This is what most systems look like up close. People with decent hearts, caught between rules they didn't write and consequences they can't afford. Cole set the coffee on the counter a little harder than he meant to. "How much?" he asked quietly. "For one of those hot sandwiches, 2 of those burritos, a couple of bottled waters, and whatever meat you'd sell for someone's bobcat." He didn't look at the girl yet. He kept his eyes on the cashier, giving her something else to focus on. "Oh, she started ringing items up. "You sure you want all that? We've got cheaper options over." "I'm sure." He pulled a worn wallet from his back pocket. The bills inside were folded. Careful, small stacks he'd been rationing for motel rooms and gas. Not for moments like this. His hand didn't shake, but it wasn't as steady as it liked to pretend. The total flashed on the screen. He slid the money across anyway. Behind him, the girl cleared her throat. "Mister, I can't pay you back." Cole finally turned and met her eyes. They were too old for her face, tired, but still holding a tiny, stubborn spark. "You're not paying me back," he said. "If I buy it, it's not old food anymore. It's dinner. For your bobcat." He paused. "And for you." The word hung there, heavier than it should have been. Her hand trembled just once as she took the bag. But when she looked down at the carrier, the bobcat shifted closer to her fingers, like it understood something important had just changed. Out in the parking lot, the sun was lower now. Shadows are getting longer. The desert has a way of making every small choice feel bigger, because there's so much nothing around it. Cole watched the girl step toward the road, plastic bag rustling, carrier swinging a little at her side. No car, no ride. Just miles of heat between here and wherever home was. He could have climbed on his bike, started the engine, and let the sound of it drown out everything else. That's what he'd done for years. Keep moving. Don't get involved. Don't feel too much. Instead, he called out, voice almost casual. "Hey, kid, you walking far with that bobcat?" She stopped, turned. 2 miles? Like it was nothing. Like she'd done it before. He nodded slowly. Desert gets cold fast after dark. A beat of silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken stories on both sides. "Come on," he said. "I'll walk with you." He didn't know yet that those 2 miles would change everything. He just knew that for the first time in a long time, turning away felt worse than staying. If you've ever had one small moment tug you off the path you thought you were on, stay with this story, because in the next part, we'll follow that road out of town, past the last streetlight, all the way to a trailer on the edge of the desert, and to the place a biker, a girl, and a bobcat would each start learning what home could mean again. By the time Cole and Riley left the glow of the gas station behind, the sun was sliding down behind the low hills, turning the desert copper and rose. Out here, just past the last streetlight of Silver Creek, the edges of town blur into scrub and dust. Mailboxes lean toward the road like they're still waiting for news that never came. They walked single file along the narrow shoulder. Cole carried the grocery bag now, the plastic cutting into his hand. Riley held the pet carrier with both arms, the bobcat inside shifting its weight every few steps. Clover's low, questioning huff rose now and then, a reminder that there was more than one hungry heart on that road. "Does she always ride like that?" Cole asked eventually. Riley nodded. "She likes knowing I'm close. Hates trucks, though." As if on cue, a semi roared by, throwing a gust of wind and grit across them. Clover let out a sharp, offended sound. Riley murmured something soft through the vents, a private language between girl and bobcat. The carrier went still. Sometimes the first sign of love is how someone talks when they think no one else is listening. The trailer appeared slowly, the way these places do. First, a sloping power line, then a rusted mailbox with the name Heart stenciled on in fading black. Then, at the end of a short dirt driveway, a single wide sits low on tired cinder blocks. In the last light, it looked like someone had tried very hard to keep the world from falling in. Sheets of plastic were stapled over one window where the glass had cracked. A blue tarp was strapped across one corner of the roof, flapping just enough to make a soft, restless sound. There was a set of steps, with one board obviously newer than the rest, as if somebody had already repaired the worst of the damage once and run out of lumber for the rest. Off to the side, framed by 2 sun-bleached lawn chairs, stood a small enclosure made of welded wire panels and shade cloth. Inside, a low platform, a plastic igloo doghouse, and a thick, chewed rope toy. This was Clover's world. A wild heart on a leash, sitting in the middle of a yard where nothing else was allowed to grow. Riley shifted the carrier in her arms and called quietly, "Mama, we're home." The trailer door opened after a pause that felt a little too long. A woman stepped into the doorway, hand braced on the frame. Megan. You could see right away that her body had been fighting something for a while, not just the illness, but the weight of bills and worry and waiting rooms. Her eyes went straight to the bobcat carrier, then to the grocery bag in Cole's hand. "I thought you were just running to the gas station," she said to Riley. "I didn't know you were bringing home half the store." Riley didn't answer right away. She just looked up at Cole, uncertain about how to explain him. "He was there," she said at last. "He bought dinner for me, Clover, and—" Megan's gaze shifted back to Cole. A quick scan, the kind every mother learns even when she's too tired to stand up straight. Stranger, motorcycle jacket, weathered face, groceries. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "I know," Cole replied. "I wanted to." He didn't offer more. Sometimes too many words make a simple kindness feel complicated. Inside, the trailer smelled like lemon cleaner and something medicinal underneath. The kind of clean you only get when someone is trying to fight back with bleach and hot water against things they can't control. The counters were wiped down, dishes stacked in tidy towers. A single pot sat on the stove, rinsed and turned upside down to dry. On the fridge, held up by a magnet shaped like a desert lizard, was a paper from the hospital with appointment times circled and crossed out. When Megan opened the refrigerator door, the light came on, but not much else did. A carton of half and half, 2 eggs, a small container of something homemade stretched as far as it could go. Cole set the grocery bag on the counter next to it, the weight of it suddenly feeling heavier for what it meant. He noticed the stack of envelopes by the sink as he unpacked. All of them are thin and official. Utilities, clinic, pharmacy. He didn't read the numbers, but he knew their shape. Red stamps. Past due. Final notice. In America, you learn to recognize those envelopes, even if you've never seen the exact ones before. Out back, the wire enclosure rattled gently as Riley slid the bobcat carrier inside and opened the door. Clover stepped out with careful grace, moving on paws that were too big for her still. Tail low but steady. She sniffed the air, then moved to the section of fence closest to the trailer window, the spot where she could keep Riley and Megan in view. Riley brought out a metal bowl, poured some of the meat Cole had bought into it. She set it on the packed dirt, then stepped back out of respect for the wildness she loved. Clover didn't pounce. She walked to the bowl and began to eat in slow, measured bites. People sometimes imagine bobcats as nothing but aggression and teeth, but Clover ate the way someone who's known hunger learns to eat. Thoughtfully, like she understood there had to be enough for later. Inside, Megan leaned against the counter while Cole unpacked cans and bread and a rotisserie chicken into empty cabinets. At one point, she reached out almost automatically to slide the chicken a little farther from herself toward where Riley would sit. He noticed. So did she. "Old habit," she said with a small, embarrassed smile. "You spend enough years as a waitress, you get used to sending the good stuff away from you." But it was more than restaurant training. It was the reflex of a parent who has been doing the math on every meal for too long. This is what hunger and illness often look like in real life. Not a dramatic collapse. Not a single tragic moment. Just a series of quiet adjustments. Skipping the better portion, using half the dose of medicine, ignoring your own fears so your kid doesn't see it. We don't always recognize those choices when we're healthy and full. But if you've ever watched someone you love pretend they weren't in pain so you wouldn't worry, you know exactly what we're describing here. Cole saw something else too. On the small table by the window, half hidden under a newspaper, lay a spiral notebook flipped open. There was writing on the page, Megan's hand. The ink smudged near the bottom where she'd stopped suddenly. Just a few words were visible before she quietly slid the paper over it. "Dear Riley, if you're reading this someday." She didn't say anything about it. Neither did he. But the presence of that unfinished letter sat between them like a fourth person in the room. From outside came the sound of Riley's voice, light and animated for the first time, telling Clover the story of their walk from the gas station. You could hear the bobcat's low, contented chuff in response. In this little triangle, a biker, a sick mother, a girl with a bobcat, everyone was a little bit caged by money, by diagnosis, by guilt and memory. The only true wild thing was the cat, and even she lived inside a welded wire. But for the first time in a long time, something had entered this space that wasn't fear or scarcity. It was the possibility that someone might stay. If you've ever stepped into a home where there wasn't much, but everything was arranged as it mattered, you know how loud that kind of love can be. It echoes in the way people scrub the floor, in the way they stack the dishes just so, in the way they ration the good pieces of chicken. In the next part of this story, we'll slow down inside those days. Watch how simple acts of caregiving, burned eggs and pill schedules, and homework at a wobbly table start to pull three very different lives into the same orbit. If you've ever wondered how healing can begin with nothing more than showing up again tomorrow, stay with us. The next 4 days in Silver Creek didn't arrive with big speeches or sudden miracles. They came in quietly, one sunrise at a time, and for once, Cole didn't outrun any of them. He stayed. It started with breakfast. On the first morning, Cole showed up at the trailer with a carton of eggs, a small bag of potatoes, and the kind of determination a man gets when he's trying something new and pretending it's no big deal. "I can cook," he told Riley, standing at the tiny stove. "How hard can it be?" The answer, as it turned out, was harder than he thought. He cracked 3 eggs into a pan that was far too hot. They seized up into rubber at the edges while the centers stayed strangely liquid. The potatoes came out uneven, half undercooked, half nearly burned. Oil popped from the skillet and landed on his wrist. He flinched, muttered something under his breath. From the table, Riley watched, serious as a courtroom. Then, very gently, she reached for a fork. "Here," she said, standing beside him. "If you turn the heat down and kind of move them like this." She coaxed the eggs away from disaster as best she could. Together, they ended up with something halfway between scrambled and scrambled up, which was good enough for 3 plates. Clover watched from outside through the open window, bobcat eyes following every movement in the little kitchen. When Riley stepped out to give her a piece of cooked chicken they'd saved from the night before, the bobcat took it delicately, then sat to eat with the same slow, careful bites as before. Inside, Megan smiled at the plate in front of her. "This looks fancy," she said, even though it didn't. She ate more than she usually did, and no one pointed that out. Sometimes caregiving looks like a perfect meal laid out on a big table. Most of the time, it looks more like this. Burned edges and second attempts, and people standing shoulder to shoulder in a too small kitchen, trying. Later that morning, Cole noticed the calendar taped to the fridge. 3 appointments circled in the past week. 2 of them crossed out with shaky lines. 1 simply left untouched. "You missed a treatment?" he asked quietly. Megan shrugged with one shoulder. "Clinics in Flagstaff. I didn't have gas money that day." Then, after a beat, "And I didn't want Riley to see me come home sicker than when I left." On the counter sat a pill organizer with more empty slots than full ones. Some days she'd taken the medication, some days she'd pushed it aside. It's funny how the body learns to ration hope the same way it rations food. That afternoon, while Riley was outside brushing Clover's coat through the wire, with a soft hand and a steady stream of conversation, Cole sat at the table with Megan and went through the pill box with her. They made a schedule, little dots of ink on a sticky note. 8 a.m., 2 p.m., 8 p.m. "I don't like how they make me feel," she admitted. "Foggy, numb." "I get that," he said. "But if you can stand it, it buys time, and time matters." "For her," Megan said, glancing toward the window. "For her," he agreed. He didn't tell her how well he understood the instinct to skip medicine, skip appointments, skip all the things that kept you tethered to a life you weren't sure you wanted. That conversation was coming, but not yet. First, there were pills to line up and water glasses to fill. Caregiving is rarely dramatic. Most of the time, it's a quiet argument with someone you love about taking what might help them. even when it's hard. Each evening, Riley did her homework at the small table by the window. She spread her worksheets out next to a chipped mug of pencils, glancing toward the enclosure every few minutes to make sure Clover was still in sight. On the second night, halfway through a math problem, her head drooped. The pencil slipped from her fingers and rolled across the page. She was asleep before it stopped. Cole stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching. Her cheek rested on fractions and long division, the numbers blurring with the slow rise and fall of her breath. He could have let her sleep there, but something about the angle of her neck made him wince. Gently, he scooped her up, surprised by how little she weighed. Her arms tightened reflexively around his neck, then relaxed. In the low lamplight of her small room, he saw something he hadn't allowed himself to see in years. A child in his arms, trusting him without asking for proof. An image flashed through his mind. Another bedroom, another little girl, a dandelion clutched in her hand. The echo of a giggle that hadn't been heard in a long time. His chest tightened so hard he had to sit on the edge of the bed for a moment and breathe through it. Outside, Clover paced once, twice along the fence line, then settled with her body oriented toward the window, as if she were standing guard over all of them. Bobcats in the wild are solitary. They keep their own company, move at their own rhythm, but an animal like Clover, raised between wild and human, learns something else too. How to track the emotional weather of a household. Over those 4 desert days, Clover started her own quiet tests. On the first day, she stayed on the far side of the enclosure whenever Cole stepped into the yard, head low, eyes sharp. On the second day, she inched closer when he sat on an overturned crate outside the fence and spoke to her in a low voice, more for his sake than hers. By the third day, she accepted a piece of meat from the tip of his gloved fingers, pausing just long enough to look him right in the eyes before taking it. Not aggressive, not fearful, just deciding. By the fourth day, when a truck backfired on the road and Riley startled, Clover didn't bolt to the far corner like she usually did. She pressed herself to the section of fence between the girl and the sound instead, body angled, eyes scanning. When Cole stepped out onto the porch, she flicked an ear toward him and then relaxed, as if satisfied with the head count. People talk about bobcats as symbols of independence, mystery, and survival. Here, Clover was also something else. A mirror held up to the humans around her. When she watched Cole and stayed, it meant something. Those 4 days didn't turn Cole into a different man, but they did something maybe more important. They gave him moments to choose differently, to show up with breakfast instead of riding past, to sit at a table, lining up someone else's pills instead of counting his own regrets, to carry a sleeping child to bed without fleeing from the memory it stirred. Healing didn't arrive with a fanfare. It arrived in tiny, almost invisible decisions. If you've ever found yourself caring for someone and realizing that the act of caring was slowly mending something in you too, you already know the shape of what was happening here. Of course, life rarely lets a fragile piece last without challenge. While these 4 desert days were teaching a biker, a girl, a sick mother, and a bobcat how to breathe under the same roof, someone else was already watching from a distance, making very different plans. In the next part of this story, that knock on the door will come, carrying paperwork, old family grudges, and a threat to everything they've just begun to build. If you've ever wondered how quickly help can turn into a fight, and how far someone will go once they've decided to stay, keep listening. Desert nights in Silver Creek have their own kind of silence. It's not empty, it's full of small sounds. The hum of a distant highway, the click of cooling metal on an old truck, the slow rasp of a bobcat's breath as she settles in her pen. For 4 evenings, that's all Cole heard. On the 5th, he heard tires on gravel and a door shutting too hard. A late-model SUV eased up the dirt drive like it was visiting the wrong neighborhood. Headlights swept across the trailer, across the enclosure where Clover paced, then clicked off. For a moment, everything went dark again. Megan was at the table, a blanket pulled around her shoulders, a half-finished cup of tea in front of her. Riley sat on the floor with a school notebook, Clover's collar and leash lined up neatly beside her, just in case the bobcat ever needed to be moved. When the knock came, it wasn't frantic. It was the kind of knock people use when they're sure they belong there. Megan's hand tightened around the mug. "That'll be Trent," she said quietly. She opened the door before Cole could stand. Trent Collins filled the threshold with a tired, polished confidence, shirt pressed, shoes clean, one hand holding a leather folder, the other resting casually on the doorframe. "Hey, Meg," he said, eyes already scanning past her into the trailer. "Heard your voicemail. Had to see things for myself." His gaze landed on Cole, then on Riley, then on the stack of bills near the sink. He took it all in the way a banker reads a balance sheet. "You came a long way," Megan said. "You didn't have to do that." "Sure I did. You're my sister." The word sister sat in the air like something he'd practiced saying, not something he felt. He stepped inside without waiting. His eyes moved to the refrigerator, the thin cupboards, the worn linoleum. Finally, they stopped at the back window, where Clover's outline moved in the half-light. "And there she is," he said, "the famous bobcat." He said bobcat the way some people say problem. Riley stood up, instinctively putting herself between Trent and the window. Clover, sensing the change in the room, came to the fence and stared back at the house with narrowed eyes. Trent gave a small, almost amused snort. "You really still have that thing out here? Meg, this isn't a wildlife park. You're sick. There's a child involved." This is exactly the kind of stuff that raises red flags. He opened the leather folder and laid a few papers on the table. Official letterhead, legal language, the kind of documents that make your heart pound even before you read them. "I talked to a lawyer," he said. "Looked into your situation. You're upside down on medical bills. The trailer's barely habitable. You've got a wild animal in the yard and no income. The state does not like that picture." Megan's jaw clenched. "I'm doing the best I can, Trent. I know." He almost sounded sincere. "That's why I'm here. There are survivor benefits from Evan's job. You know that. Monthly money for Riley until she's grown. A stipend if someone in the family steps up as guardian." He tapped the papers. "I can petition for temporary custody, get her into a decent house, good school, maybe even rehome the cat." Clover hissed softly from outside, as if she understood more than she should. From the corner, Riley's voice came out, small but solid. "I'm not going anywhere with you." Trent turned to her with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "It's not really up to you, kiddo. Grown-ups have to make the hard calls. Here's where it's tempting to paint him as nothing but greedy. But life is rarely that simple." Trent had been the older kid in a house where the power got shut off more than once. The one sent to argue with landlords, to call creditors, to translate adult words he barely understood. Somewhere along the way, he learned that whoever held the paperwork held the power. He just never learned how to use that power without taking more than his share. He left that night with his folder a little lighter and Megan's world a little heavier. When the door closed behind him, the trailer seemed smaller. Later that week, the real blow landed. It was near midnight when Megan's body finally announced it had carried enough. The pain she'd been hiding sharpened. Her legs went out from under her between the table and the couch. Riley screamed her name. Cole called 911 with hands that felt too large for the phone. The ambulance lights painted the yard red and blue, Clover's enclosure glowing like some strange stage. Paramedics moved calmly, voices low. They loaded Megan on a stretcher, IV already dripping, oxygen mask in place. Her hand found Riley's for half a second, squeezed, then slid away. "I'll be right behind her," Cole told Riley as they watched the ambulance pull off. "I promise." He meant it. He didn't know that the next knock would change whose promise mattered. An hour later, headlights swept the yard again. This time, it was a patrol car and a state sedan. A woman stepped out first, rubbing her eyes like she'd been pulled from sleep and from another call. "Miss." "Hart?" she called, then stopped when she saw only Cole and Riley at the door. "I'm Ms. Alvarez," she said, voice gentle. "Child Protective Services." Those 3 words can sound like a threat or a lifeline, depending on where you're standing. She explained in steady, practiced phrases, that when a single parent is admitted to intensive care and there's no legal guardian on file, the state is obligated to ensure the child's immediate safety. Emergency custody, temporary placement, court review.
It doesn't mean you've done anything wrong,
She told Riley quietly.
but we don't have paperwork for him.
She nodded toward Cole.
We have paperwork for an uncle.
Trent. Riley's fingers dug into the edge of the door.
I don't want to go with him, she whispered. Please.
Ms. Alvarez's face softened in a way that didn't match the formal words. This was a woman who had stood on a lot of porches at a lot of midnights.
I hear you,
she said. More than you know. But right now I have to follow what's written in front of me. If I don't, I could lose my job, and if I lose my job, I can't help anyone.
Do you understand?
Riley nodded, tears finally spilling over. She turned and walked to her room, coming back with a small backpack, a worn stuffed animal, and Clover's leather collar folded carefully in her hand. She pressed the collar into Cole's palm like it was a promise.
Keep this safe for me, she said, so she knows I didn't leave her on purpose.
Clover paced in her pen, restless, picking up on the tension and trying in her bobcat way to contain it. She let out a low, rising call as Riley climbed into the back seat of the sedan, eyes locked on the enclosure until the door closed. The car pulled away. The patrol cruiser followed. The red dust settled slowly back onto the road. Cole stood there in the quiet, a grown man holding a bobcat's collar in one hand and nothing at all in the other. If you've ever watched Good Intentions run headlong into policy, you know what this night feels like. No villains in uniform, no easy heroes, just people reading from different scripts, and a child caught in the middle. This is where some stories end. A girl taken, a wildlife bobcat left pacing behind a fence, a tired biker deciding it's a sign he should keep moving. But that's not what happened here. In the next part of this story, we'll follow what Cole does with that collar in his hand. We'll watch how a wild animal's quiet trust, a dead father's words, and a worn-out lawyer in Flagstaff all start weaving together into a case no one expected to fight. If you've ever wondered how far someone will go when they finally decide not to walk away, stay close. The real battle is just beginning. Some mornings change your life without warning. Others just hand you a phone number and wait to see what you'll do with it. For Cole, it started with a scrap of paper on the gas station counter. The clerk, the same woman who'd watched Riley ask for old food for her bobcat, slid it toward him when he came in for coffee 2 days after CPS took Riley. "You're the biker that's been helping out at the Heart Place?" she asked. He nodded. "I heard what happened." Her voice dropped. "You should call this woman. She helped my cousin when her grandkids got caught up in a mess like this. Name's Nora Fields, family law, Flagstaff." Cole stared at the number. Court, lawyers, systems. All the things he'd spent 7 years riding away from. He thought about throwing the paper in the trash on his way out. Instead, he tucked it into his jacket with Clover's collar. Back at the trailer, Clover paced the length of her enclosure, restless. She'd been like that since Riley left, eating less, patrolling more. Bobcats are independent by nature, but this one had learned to anchor herself to a small circle of humans. When one of them disappeared, it showed. Cole sat on an upside-down milk crate near the fence. The desert wind lifted dust into soft swirls at his boots. He held the phone as it might bite. Finally, he dialed. On the second ring, a voice answered, steady, a little weary, like it had heard a lot of stories. "This is Nora." Cole cleared his throat. "My name's Cole Maddox. I'm trying to keep a girl from being shipped off to a man who wants her money more than he wants her. There's a bobcat involved, and a lot of paperwork that says I'm nobody." There was a brief silence, then a quiet exhale, almost a half laugh. "Well," she said, "that's not the strangest opening line I've had this year. Start at the beginning, I've got time." He told her about the gas station, about the trailer, about Megan, about CPS at the door and Trent at the edges, smiling. He didn't tell her everything about himself, not yet. Nora listened without interrupting, except to ask the kinds of questions people rarely think to ask. How does the girl act around you? What's the bobcat like with strangers? Has anyone from the community seen you together? Finally, she said, "All right, here's the truth. You're not family. You've known her for barely 2 weeks. Your odds are terrible." But terrible odds aren't zero. If you want to fight this, you're going to have to work harder than you've worked at anything in your life. What does that look like? Cole asked. It looks like you're showing up as the most stable, boring, trustworthy man this judge has ever seen, Nora said. It looks like counseling for your own grief. It looks like witnesses. And it looks like proving that when this kid and this bobcat had to pick someone, they picked you. He glanced at Clover. She had stopped pacing and pressed her forehead against the fence near his shoulder, ears relaxed, eyes half closed. "Yeah," he said slowly, "they did." We don't often think of animals as character witnesses, but anyone who's lived with a dog or watched a bobcat from a distance knows. Some creatures read us better than we read ourselves. Nora drove down 2 days later. She sat at the wobbly table in the trailer, legal pad in front of her, glasses at the end of her nose. Cole spread out every document Megan had left. Evan's old wildlife officer ID, Clover's permit paperwork, and a few letters. One of those letters mattered more than it first appeared. It was a note Evan had written when Clover was officially designated non-releasable. In plain handwriting, he'd described how the bobcat had been injured, how she'd been raised around humans enough that she couldn't safely go back to the wild, and why he believed she could still have a purpose. He'd added a line near the bottom. Clover's never been wrong about people. If she relaxes around someone, I trust them with my life and with my girls. Nora read that line twice. "This," she said, tapping the page, "isn't law, but it's a story that makes sense. A father who trusted his bobcat's instincts. A daughter who trusts the same animal. A stranger the bobcat chooses to lean on when everything falls apart." She looked up at Cole. Judges are people. People remember stories. While Nora gathered police contacts and called old colleagues who'd worked with Evan, another part of the story kept unfolding out of sight. Riley, in a foster home on the other side of town, learned the rhythm of someone else's kitchen. She folded pajamas that weren't hers, shared a room with a girl who cried in her sleep, ate food she didn't help bring into the house. One afternoon, a volunteer brought in a small group of shelter animals for the kids to meet. 2 nervous dogs and a cat with 1 ear. Riley watched how the animals scanned the room, sorting safe from unsafe, without using a single word. When the other children crowded forward, she hung back. Then, when the 1-eared cat bolted under a chair, she knelt in the corner and waited quietly, hand extended but not reaching. Eventually, the cat crept toward her and pressed its head into her palm. Later, the staff noted in a file, "Good with animals. Calming presence. Seems to understand stress." She wrote letters after lights out, one to the judge, explaining in simple sentences why she wanted to go back to the trailer on the edge of town, where the bobcat was, and the man who came back even after he left once. One to Cole, which she wasn't sure he'd ever see. One she kept folded inside her pillowcase, addressed to her mom. Meanwhile, Nora pushed Cole to face something he'd carried much longer than a bobcat's collar. "If you walk into court with that much grief sitting just under your skin," she said, "it's going to leak out sideways. You need somewhere it can go that isn't a courtroom or a child." So Cole ended up in a small office in town, sitting across from a therapist who had a jar of peppermints on her desk and a framed drawing from a grandchild on the wall. It was a far cry from the places he usually spent his afternoons. In the first session, he mostly stared at the floor. The second, he talked about the accident, about the daughter he lost, about the bullet he once thought would end the story. The third, he admitted something he hadn't said out loud. "I don't know if I'm fighting to save her or to save myself. And I'm scared that makes me dangerous." The therapist didn't flinch. "What if," she asked, "it just makes you human?" In a tired system, overworked caseworkers, crowded dockets, forms stacked high, what Nora and the therapist and the gas station clerk and Evan's old partner were building wasn't just a legal case. It was a picture of a man who, when given every excuse to keep running, turned around instead. And hovering over all of it was this quiet, stubborn fact. When everything went wrong, the bobcat had chosen to stay near him. If you've ever had an animal lean against your leg on a hard day, or a child slip their hand into yours without asking, you know the power of being chosen like that. It doesn't make you perfect. It just makes you responsible. Next, we'll step into that courtroom in Flagstaff. We'll watch how a judge with tired eyes weighs a wild cat's instincts, a girl's voice, a brother's paperwork, and a biker's willingness to stand still at last. If you've ever wondered what it looks like when head and heart collide under fluorescent lights, come with us into that room. Flagstaff's family courthouse doesn't look like the place where lives change. From the outside, it's just brick and glass and a row of tired juniper bushes trying to stay green in the high desert air. Inside, on a Tuesday morning, it was fluorescent lights, hushed voices, and a clerk calling names that sounded like they belonged in school pickup lines, not legal files. Somewhere in that stack of cases, Hart versus Collins, and a quiet question underneath it. Who should a 10-year-old girl and her bobcat call home? Cole sat at the end of a hard wooden bench, hands folded tight, Clover's worn collar in his pocket like a small, heavy promise. Nora sat beside him, reviewing notes she already knew by heart. Across the aisle, Trent adjusted his tie and checked his watch, papers neatly clipped in a dark leather folder. At the front of the room, Judge Elaine Porter took her seat. She looked like someone who'd spent years listening more than she spoke. Before she said a word, she rubbed at her temples for just a second, the way people do when they're carrying one too many stories in their head. "All rise!" the bailiff called. Everyone stood. Everyone sat. The day began. The clerk read the case name. Legal phrases filled the air. Petition for guardianship, best interests of the child, survivor benefits. Words that sound clean on paper and feel tangled in real life. The judge glanced over her glasses. I understand there is also a bobcat involved? A murmur rippled through the room. Someone in the back gave a small, surprised laugh. Nora rose. Yes, Your Honor, a non-releasable bobcat named Clover. She's part of the context, not the question, but she matters. That was Nora's gift. She could talk about wildcats and complex systems in the same sentence without raising her voice. Trent's attorney went first. He painted a picture of stability, a house with a yard, a steady income, a college fund started just in case. He called Trent the responsible uncle and used phrases like biological family and traditional placement. Then he pivoted. He spoke of Cole as a transient biker with no permanent address, mentioned a history of depression and years spent on the road. He asked the court to consider the risk of placing a vulnerable child with someone so recently arrived, so emotionally encumbered. Cole felt the words land like small blows. He'd known they were coming. That didn't make them easier to hear. When it was Nora's turn, she didn't start with Cole. She started with Evan. She called one of Evan's colleagues, a retired wildlife officer, to the stand. The man's uniform didn't quite fit the way it used to, but his voice held steady. He talked about long nights, tracking poachers, controlled burns that got out of hand, school talks where Evan and a young bobcat named Clover sat side by side in front of wide-eyed second graders. Evan always said Clover had a sixth sense about people, the officer told the court. If she relaxed around someone, he didn't ask more questions. He just trusted them. And he was not an easy man to impress. Nora handed the judge the letter Evan had written years earlier, the one about Clover never being wrong about a person, about trusting her instincts. With my life and my girls. Your Honor, Nora said, we're not asking you to let a bobcat make a legal decision. We're asking you to see how a father who risked his life for a living chose to put his trust somewhere unusual, and how that trust seems to be echoing now. Next came Ms. Alvarez, the CPS worker who'd stood on Megan's porch at midnight. She looked tired on the stand, but she didn't dodge questions. She described the emergency removal. Megan in intensive care. No guardianship paperwork. Pressure to act quickly.
I didn't think Mr. Maddox was a danger, she admitted. I thought he was in over his head. There's a difference. But the system doesn't always have a box for good man with no paperwork.
It wasn't an apology exactly. It was something more honest. A glimpse at how good people can still be part of hard things. Then the guardian ad litem, Rebecca Cho, testified. She'd spent hours with Riley in the foster home, talking about school, Clover, and the trailer on the edge of town.
Riley is afraid of her uncle,
Rebecca said simply.
She's not afraid he'll hit her.
She's afraid he'll turn her into a problem to be solved instead of a person to be loved. She paused, eyes softening.
She told me that Mr. Maddox came back after he left once.
For a child who has lost so much, that matters more than a mortgage or a credit score. Finally, it was Cole's turn. He walked to the witness stand with the awkwardness of a man much more comfortable on 2 wheels than 2 feet. Swore to tell the truth. Sat down. Nora asked him about the gas station, about Megan, about the 4 desert days, about why he stayed when he could have kept riding. Then she did something he hadn't expected. She asked about his daughter. He talked about the accident in halting sentences, hands clenched in his lap, about the guilt that followed him like a shadow, about the bullet he'd carried too long, about how hearing Riley's stomach growl in that mini-mart pulled him off the road. He thought he was on.
Are you healed?
Nora asked softly.
No,
he said, but I'm not running anymore. When Trent's attorney rose to cross-examine, he picked at every loose thread. Why had Cole been alone so long? Why didn't he settle down sooner? Wasn't he trying to replace his lost child with another? Cole didn't try to make himself look better than he was. I can't replace my daughter, he said, and I can't give Riley a life without pain. But I can give her a life where the person who makes her breakfast is the same one who tucks her in at night. Where the man who left once keeps coming back. That's what I'm offering. Then finally, they brought Riley in. She looked smaller than Cole remembered in that big room. Still, she walked straight to the chair the bailiff pointed to, clutching the edge of her dress with both hands. Judge Porter leaned forward a fraction. Her voice softened.
Eleanor,
she said,
do you know why you're here today? To decide where I live,
Riley answered.
That's part of it,
the judge agreed. Grown-ups are going to look at laws and records and all sorts of things. But I also want to know what you want. What feels safe to you? Can you tell me that? Riley glanced once at Trent, once at Cole, then on the floor.
My uncle has a nice house, she said carefully.
He told me that.
But when he looks at me, it's like he's already thinking about papers.
She took a breath.
When Mr.
Maddox looks at me, it's like he's checking if I ate, if I slept, if Clover's okay. I know he's sad. I know he's scared. But he came back. Nobody else did that. Silence settled over the room like dust. A monitor in the corner showed a short clip Nora had offered as context. Supervised footage from the bobcat's pen. In one moment, Trent stood by the fence, Clover low and wary. In another, Cole sat on the crate outside, talking softly, Clover pressed to the wire near his shoulder, eyes half closed in that unmistakable bobcat signal of trust. Judge Porter watched both clips without comment. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of years.
This is one of the more unusual cases I've seen, she admitted. We have blood family. We have a man with a complicated past.
We have a child who has already lost more than she should. And we have a wild animal whose behavior seems to line up with what everyone is saying. She looked at Riley.
You have been very brave.
She looked at Cole.
You have a long road ahead of you if I grant this.
She looked at Trent. And you, sir, may not like what I'm about to say. Then she laid out her decision. 6 months of temporary guardianship to Cole. Conditions attached. therapy, school attendance, home visits, and proof of stability. At the end of that time, they would review. If Riley was safe and thriving, the guardianship would become permanent. The gavel came down, a sound like a period at the end of a long, complicated sentence. In the back of the room, someone exhaled. At the front, a girl smiled through tears. On a small patch of land outside Silver Creek, a bobcat paced her pen and paused, head lifted, as if she could feel something shifting miles away. Courtrooms don't often feel like places of hope, but sometimes, in between the hard cases and tired faces, you get a moment where a system built on rules bends just enough to let a human story through. In the next part of this journey, we'll leave the fluorescent lights and return to the trailer on the edge of town. We'll see what it looks like when a biker, a girl, and a wild cat try to turn a court order into something that feels like a real home. If you've ever wondered how healing plays out, not in verdicts, but in breakfasts, bedtimes, and small routines, come spend those 6 months with them. If you'd driven past the Hart trailer in those 6 months, you might not have noticed anything special. Same dusty lot off the county road, same sagging power line, same bobcat enclosure catching the morning light. But if you looked closer, really looked, you'd have seen it. A little more steam on cold mornings, a little more laughter floating through thin walls, a biker who wasn't getting ready to leave. The first change came on a Sunday. Cole was up before dawn, the way you are when your nerves still don't quite believe good news. The court order sat on the kitchen counter, corners already soft from how many times he'd picked it up and put it down. Temporary guardianship. 6 months. He opened a box of pancake mix, like it was a manual for some complicated machine. Riley shuffled in, hair mussed from sleep, eyes still puffy.
What are you doing?
She asked. Thought we'd start a thing, he said. Sunday pancakes. Every week. No matter what. He didn't say that part out loud, but it was there. He poured batter too thick at first, then too thin. The first one came out looking like the state of Arizona, all jagged edges. The second folded in on itself when he tried to flip it. Riley watched with a small smile she tried to hide.
Maybe I should,
she began. Nope, he interrupted, grinning. I've got something to prove. By the fourth pancake, they had something almost round. They sat at the table with mismatched plates, syrup in a chipped mug, Clover watching from the window as the smells drifted out. It wasn't about the pancakes. It was about the idea. Every Sunday, no matter how the week went, there would be this. That's how hope started to look in that trailer. Not as a feeling that arrived when life smoothed out, but as a set of small, repeatable habits. Things you could count on, even when you couldn't count on much else. On school days, Riley walked out to the road with a backpack that didn't look quite so heavy anymore. Silver Creek Elementary was still a hard place some days. Kids stare, kids whisper. But over time, new patterns formed there too. The teacher, who quietly tucked an extra granola bar into her desk drawer, just in case someone forgets breakfast. The boy who sat next to her at lunch asked about the bobcat, if it were the most normal thing in the world. So she's wild, he said, cheeks full of peanut butter. But she likes you?
She tolerates me,
Riley corrected. Then, after a beat, she likes him.
She nodded toward where Cole waited in the pickup at the end of the driveway. After school, they drove home past the same scrub and sandstone.
Sometimes they talked about spelling tests. Sometimes about the way Clover flattened her ears when thunder rolled over the hills.
Sometimes they just rode in companionable silence, the radio low, desert radio voices drifting in and out.
Meanwhile, Cole traded his motorcycle for a used pickup and a stack of tools. He started a little mobile repair business, fixing fences, swamp coolers, busted pumps. Nothing glamorous, nothing you'd write an article about. But work that puts gas in the tank and groceries in the fridge. He kept counseling appointments too. Every Thursday afternoon, he sat in that small office in town, learning things that would have sounded strange to him a year before. Grounding exercises, how to tell the difference between a flashback and a memory. How to say, I'm not okay today, without feeling like he'd failed some invisible test. One week, The therapist suggested that he teach one of those breathing techniques to Riley.
Kids carry more than we think they do, she said.
It won't fix everything, but it gives her one more tool.
That night, when a monsoon storm blew in hard and fast, shaking the trailer walls, Riley's fear came out sideways.
She snapped at Cole over something small, then immediately apologized, eyes wide. It's okay to be scared, you told her. Everybody is sometimes.
You want to try something that helps me? They sat on the floor by the couch, knees almost touching.
He talked her through counting breaths, feeling the weight of her own body on the carpet, and noticing the sound of rain on the roof instead of the thunder. Outside, Clover pressed herself against the dry side of her enclosure, ears twitching at every rumble. But she stayed close to the window, where she could see them. Hope in that moment looked like 3 hearts beating fast in the dark, and nobody facing it alone. In small ways, old patterns started to loosen their grip. Cole had grown up with a father who disappeared when the bills stacked too high. His muscle memory was to leave when things got ugly. To get quieter, the closer feelings came. Riley had grown used to being the one who gave up the last bite, the last blanket, the last ounce of worry-free childhood. Over 6 months of soft mornings and long evenings, those reflexes met resistance. When money got tight, Cole didn't pack the truck and vanish. He picked up an extra job, installing a water heater for a rancher an hour out of town. A neighbor, having heard the story, slipped a bag of groceries onto the trailer steps and drove away before anyone could say thank you. When Riley found herself turning off lights compulsively, counting cans in the pantry even when there were plenty, Cole noticed. He didn't tease, he didn't scold. He started a new ritual instead. Every Friday they opened the cupboard together, counted what was there, and then each picked one item to donate to the church food box.
We've got enough to share, he'd say. That's our new kind of math.
Clover changed too. Bobcats don't usually live this way. Fenced, fed twice a day, sharing their world with human grief and human hope. As the months passed, she started to slow down a little. Jumps she used to clear in one graceful bound now took a moment's consideration. Riley saw it first. She lowered the highest platform in the enclosure, moved the resting spot closer to the ground, and filled a rubber tub with sand so Clover's joints had a softer place to land. She didn't bring it up as getting old. She just adjusted the world to make it kinder. That too was hope as a skill. Not pretending nothing changes, but meeting change with small acts of care. On Sunday afternoons, when chores were done, Cole sometimes found Riley sitting on the steps, sketchbook in hand. She drew Clover most often, stretched in the shade, eyes half closed, bobcat muscles relaxed for once. Next to Clover, in more than one drawing, was a little house with a fenced yard. A shop out back with tools on the walls. A truck is in the drive. 2 figures on the porch steps, one with long hair, one with a ball cap. A wildcat was watching over them both. When he asked her about it, she shrugged.
It's just when I'm older, she said. A place where we don't have to count how many cans are left. Maybe somewhere with more trees, but still, us.
She didn't say if, she said when. That's how you know hope has moved from feeling to skill. It starts showing up in verb tenses. As the 6-month mark approached, an envelope arrived from the court. Another date, another hearing, another room where fluorescent lights would weigh intent and evidence. Cole held the paper at the table, thumb smoothing a wrinkle near the judge's name. Riley watched him quietly.
You think she'll send me somewhere else? Riley asked. I don't know what she'll do, he answered honestly. But I know what I'll do.
I'll show her what we've built here, and I'll keep fighting for you, no matter what room we're in. Outside, Clover yawned, revealing sharp teeth, then settled back down, chin on her paws. The desert wind carried the smell of rain, or maybe that was just imagination. In the final part of this story, we'll walk into that review hearing with them. We'll see whether 6 months of soft mornings and hard work are enough to convince a tired system that this unlikely family deserves to stay together for good. If you've ever wondered whether simple, repeated kindness can really stand up against paperwork and past mistakes, Stay with us for one more step. The payoff isn't loud, but it's real.
On the morning the judge would decide whether this strange little family could stay together, the sky over Flagstaff was a clear, impossible blue.
It didn't look like a day when anything dramatic would happen. It looked like any other Tuesday in the high desert. But for one girl, one biker, and one bobcat waiting back in Silver Creek, it was the quiet edge of everything. Inside the courtroom, things moved faster this time. No long testimonies, no new accusations, just updates. The school report said Riley was attending every day, turning in homework, and making slow but steady progress. The counselor's letter noted that she still carried grief, but now she had words for it. CPS records showed a clean home, full cupboards, and no incidents. Nora spoke only as much as she needed to, filling in the gaps with simple details. Sunday pancakes, consistent counseling, a small repair business that kept the lights on and the truck running. Miss Alvarez, the CPS worker, told the judge, "When I visit that trailer now, I leave feeling lighter instead of heavier. That doesn't happen often in my job." Trent's chair was empty. His attorney showed up late and offered no new evidence, just a brief, half-hearted objection that the court should prioritize blood relatives. Judge Porter listened, hands folded, eyes moving from one file to another. Then she did something small that no one but those two in the front row noticed. She looked directly at Riley and smiled. It wasn't wide, it was just there. "Eleanor," she said, "last time you were here I told you we'd check back in. We have. I've read every report. I've watched how the adults around you have shown up. You've had more loss than most children your age. But you also have something many grown-ups never find. A home where people keep coming back." She turned to Cole. "Mr. Maddox, this court asked you to prove yourself, not by being perfect, but by being consistent. You've done that. You've worked. You've stayed in treatment. You've kept her safe. You've turned a temporary guardianship into something real." The room went still. Paper rustled somewhere in the back. Outside, traffic kept moving, unaware. "I'm granting permanent guardianship," the judge said. "Eleanor Hart will remain in your care. The court will not revisit this unless someone can show serious cause." "I hope that never happens." No gavel this time, just the soft exhale of a decision landing. Riley's fingers found Cole's sleeve, then his hand. She didn't cry. She just held on like someone bracing against a strong wind and finding, for the first time, that it didn't knock her over. They drove the winding road back down to Silver Creek with the windows cracked, desert air rolling in. Neither of them said much. Some kinds of relief don't need narration. At the trailer, Clover met them at the fence, pacing once and then settling near the gate. Riley ran to her, the way she had that very first day, but this time she wasn't carrying a plastic carrier or asking for old food. She was coming home to her wildcat. Later, when the sun started to drop behind the red rock and the air cooled, Cole brought out a small cardboard box from the top of Megan's old closet. He'd been saving it for this day. On the steps, under a string of warm porch lights, he handed Riley the spiral notebook Megan had left. "Your mom wanted you to have this when things were a little more settled," he said. They sat side by side while Riley opened it. The first pages were notes and budgets, written in a hand that got shakier over time. Then came a letter, marked with her name at the top. In it, Megan apologized for not having more to leave than bills and a bobcat, and a trailer on the edge of town. She wrote about the day Evan brought Clover home as a half-starved kitten, how he'd said, "She's wild, but she'll remind us we're not done fighting yet." And then near the end, "If you're reading this, it means you survived something I was afraid might break you. I hope you were with someone who stayed. Someone who looks at you and doesn't see a burden or a check, but a whole human being. If he makes pancakes on Sundays and talks to that bobcat as she understands him, that's even better." Riley's laugh came out on a sob. She leaned her head against Cole's shoulder and stayed there. After a while, she said it so quietly, he almost missed it.
"Is it okay if I call you Dad now?"
For a man who used to think his days as a father were over, there aren't really words for that moment.
Just the way his throat closed up, the way his hand shook as he put his arm around her, the way he finally managed. "Yeah, kid. I'd like that."
Behind the fence, Clover watched them, eyes half closed, body loose, tail flicking in that easy, familiar rhythm.
This bobcat, this wild cat who had once been half ghost with hunger, now dozed in the last light, utterly at ease in the sound of their voices.
A year earlier, Cole had come to the desert ready to disappear. Riley had stood at a counter asking for old food for her bobcat while her own stomach ached. Clover had paced a small pen tied to a past that hurt and an uncertain future. Now there was a mailbox out front with new letters painted on it, crooked but proud. Maddox-Heart. There was a repair truck parked by the fence, tools organized in the back. Flowers were growing stubbornly out of an old tire by the steps, some thriving, some still trying. And there was a rhythm. Sunday pancakes, Friday cupboard checks, evenings sitting on the steps, watching the sky darken over the high desert. A biker who finally parked his restless soul. A girl planning for a tomorrow that included both her and her bobcat. And a wild heart on a leash that somehow helped hold them all together.
The truth is, most of us won't ever have a bobcat in the yard or a court file with our name on it, but almost all of us know what it means to stand at the edge of something. Grief, guilt, loneliness, and feel like our story might be over. What this little family in Silver Creek shows us is that sometimes the turning point doesn't arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it walks in quietly in the shape of a simple question. Do you have any old food for my bobcat? And the answer that changes everything is not the policy or the rule or the easy number. It's the one person who chooses to stop, to listen, to stay. As you sit with their story, maybe ask yourself, where in your own life have you been the one asking for just the scraps, believing that's all you deserve? And where might you be called to be the one who stays, who turns back, who becomes a safe place for someone else, human or animal, who doesn't have many options left? If this story of a biker, a girl, and a bobcat on the edge of the wild touched something in you, I'd invite you to pause for a moment. Reflect on where hope might be asking to grow in your own life, and then gently tap like, subscribe, and stay with this little community we're building here. And if you feel moved to go one step further, your super thanks or donation helps real rescue teams and rehab centers care for wild animals like bobcats, creatures who can't go back to the wild, but still deserve safety, respect, and a second chance at a life with dignity.